The sharp squeal of hospital wheels echoed through the corridor as a gurney was rushed toward the emergency ward. Nurses shouted orders, for bags swung wildly, and the beeping of monitors stabbed the tense air. On the stretcher lay Marielle Davern, her face pale, drenched in sweat, her hands clutching her swollen belly as if trying to hold something inside. BP dropping, heart rate unstable, a nurse yelled, pressing down on the monitor's leads. Cedric Davern, her husband, ran beside the gurney, panic carved into every line of his face. His shirt was half-buttoned, his hair disheveled, but his voice shook with desperation. Please, somebody help her. She was fine this morning, she was in the kitchen. Now look at her. The ER doors burst open. Lights blazed down, sterile and cold, throwing every detail into stark reality. A doctor, Dr. Ilara Vanes, snapped on gloves and leaned over the patient. Marielle, can you hear me? Stay with us. What exactly happened? Marielle's lips trembled as she tried to speak, but only a strangled moan came out. Her belly shifted unnaturally beneath the hospital gown. Something inside seemed to move, roll, and press outward. The sight froze the room. Even the most seasoned nurse faltered, her eyes widening in disbelief. It's moving, whispered Dr. Vanes, her voice low, her expression tightening as she signaled for an ultrasound machine. Cedric's knees buckled. He gripped the bed rail, whispering under his breath, "Dear God, what's happening to my wife?" The machine was wheeled in, the gel smeared across Marielle's skin. The probe pressed against her abdomen, and within seconds the monitor flickered with a grainy image. The room held its breath. At first it looked like a shadow, a shifting mass. Then, suddenly, it jolted, curling in a way no one expected. The nurses gasped. Dr. Vanes pulled back, stunned. This isn't possible. Cedric staggered forward, searching their faces for answers. Tell me what it is. What's inside her? But no one answered. The silence was more terrifying than words. In that moment, the audience of doctors, nurses, and family were united by one chilling truth. Whatever was inside Marielle's belly was alive, and it was fighting to get out. The monitors beeped louder, her pulse quickening, her body trembling violently as if rejecting what it carried. A nurse squeezed Cedric's shoulder, urging him back. Sir, you need to stay behind the line. We don't know what we're dealing with. Cedric's voice broke. She was just making breakfast this morning. She laughed with the children. How can this be happening in a single day? His words hung heavy in the sterile air, painting the contrast between their peaceful home life and this unimaginable nightmare. Doctors exchanged glances, their professional masks cracking with unease. Dr. Vanes finally snapped into command mode. Prep for emergency surgery. We don't wait. If we delay even minutes, she won't survive. The gurney jerked forward again, rushing toward the operating theater. Cedric stumbled after them, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. His wife's cries echoed in his ears, twisting into something he would never forget. And just as the double doors slammed shut, he caught one final glimpse, Marielle's belly shifting under the fabric as though something inside was clawing, demanding freedom. The world outside that operating room would never be the same again. Before the chaos of the hospital and the terrifying images on the monitor, Marielle Davern had been just another woman living a quiet, simple life in her town. She was known among neighbors as fiercely independent. At 43, she balanced motherhood, household duties, and her deep belief in natural remedies with a stubbornness that sometimes frustrated those closest to her. Herbal teas lined her kitchen shelves, jars filled with dried roots and leaves labeled in her neat handwriting. Whenever illness touched the family, Marielle's first instinct was never to call a doctor. It was to brew a concoction of chamomile, peppermint, or valerian. She trusted the earth more than hospitals, a trait that made her loved but also, at times, misunderstood. Her husband, Cedric, could not have been more different. A man of quiet strength, he worked long hours at the local carpentry workshop, his hands calloused from years of shaping wood into furniture that carried both beauty and endurance. Cedric adored his wife, but he carried a permanent worry for her refusal to take her health seriously. He had seen the warnings, her occasional wince of pain when bending over, her unusual fatigue, the way she brushed off his concern with a wave of her hand. Not every problem can be solved with herbs, Marielle, he would tell her, his voice calm but insistent. And not every ache needs a scalpel, she'd reply, eyes flashing with the fire of her conviction. It was their ongoing dance, love wrapped in disagreement, worry cloaked in stubbornness. Their children, Lyra and Jonas, brought both joy and noise into the Davern home. Lyra, at 12, was curious and outspoken, often sitting at the kitchen table with books spread wide, asking her mother endless questions about life, plants, and stories of the past. Jonas, at 9, was full of energy, his laughter infectious, his mischief endless. To them, their mother was not just a caretaker but a fortress, someone unshakable, someone who could heal anything with her soft voice and warm hands. Family dinners were sacred. Cedric would carve roasted chicken while Lyra teased Jonas about his messy handwriting. Marielle would sit across from them, smiling with quiet pride, her eyes always drifting to the vase of sunflowers in the center of the table. They were her favorite, symbols of resilience always turning toward the light. But even within this warm domestic picture, cracks had begun to form. In the weeks leading up to the hospital emergency, Marielle's body had whispered warnings. She felt the swelling, the bloating, the strange heaviness in her belly. At first she ignored it. Then when Cedric pressed her to see a doctor, she refused. "It's nothing serious," she told him, masking her unease with a stubborn smile. But Cedric saw the way her hand lingered on her stomach when she thought no one was watching. He heard the stifled groans late at night when she turned over in bed. His love for her grew heavier with fear, though he tried not to show it in front of the children. Neighbors, too, noticed subtle changes. At the market, Marielle shifted uncomfortably when lifting a basket. At church, she sat more often than usual, hands folded tightly across her lap. Friends whispered in passing, but no one dared say aloud what they wondered. Something was wrong. Still, Marielle carried on, convinced that sheer willpower and herbal remedies could tame whatever storm brewed inside her body. Her world was defined by control of her home, her family's health, her daily rhythms. To admit something beyond her control was to admit weakness. And Marielle Davern was not weak. But that illusion shattered the night she collapsed at the dinner table, her fork clattering against the plate, her face drained of color. The children screamed. Cedric's chair toppled as he rushed to her side, his heart pounding with terror. That moment, the instant she fell into his arms, was the end of denial. It was the start of the nightmare that dragged them all into the fluorescent glare of the hospital, where the unknown waited inside her belly. The days after Marielle's first sharp belly pains grew heavier with unease. What she had once dismissed as a fleeting discomfort became an uninvited shadow, following her into every corner of her life. Her abdomen swelled with a tightness she could no longer ignore. Clothes that once fit her comfortably now strained against her midsection, the buttons pulling awkwardly. Yet, true to her nature, she insisted on going about her routine. "It's only water retention," she told Cedric when he frowned at her tightened dress. "Nothing a little fennel tea cannot fix." Her voice carried confidence, but her eyes darted quickly away, betraying the worry she tried to bury. At the town's open-air market, whispers began. Marielle walked from stall to stall, her basket filled with vegetables and herbs. She forced her smile wide, greeting neighbors with her usual warmth. But more than one woman's gaze lingered on her swollen belly. "Are you expecting?" one vendor asked gently, tilting her head with curiosity. Marielle froze. Her heart skipped. "No," she replied sharply, then laughed awkwardly to soften her tone. "It's just digestion issues." But the moment stayed with her. The way people looked at her belly as though it carried a secret she herself did not yet understand. The humiliation cut deeper than she admitted. That night, when Cedric tucked Jonas into bed, he caught Marielle staring into the bathroom mirror, one hand pressed flat against her abdomen. "You need to see a doctor," he urged softly, stepping behind her. Marielle shook her head, eyes still fixed on her reflection. "It will pass. It always does." But her voice lacked conviction. The nights were the worst. The swelling grew more pronounced after dark, the pain sharper, twisting through her body like invisible hands wringing her from the inside. Sometimes she woke with a start, certain she had felt something roll within her belly. At first she dismissed it as indigestion. But as the nights dragged on, the sensations became unmistakable, movement shifting as though her body hosted something alive. Her denial clashed with Cedric's rising desperation. One evening at dinner, as Lyra recounted a story from school, Marielle suddenly gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles whitening. Her fork slipped from her hand, clattering against her plate. Jonas stopped mid-laugh, his eyes widening. "Mom?" Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. Marielle forced a smile through gritted teeth. "I'm fine. Just a cramp." But Cedric had seen enough. His chair scraped back violently. "This isn't fine, Marielle. You can barely sit through a meal without pain. Look at the children, they're scared." The room fell silent, the children's wide eyes darting between their parents. Tears welled in Lyra's eyes. Jonas clutched his napkin, fidgeting nervously. Marielle's face flushed with both anger and shame. She hated feeling weak, hated that her body betrayed her in front of the people she loved most. She slammed her palms against the table, rising to her feet. "I said I'm fine," she snapped, her voice cracking. But before another word could be spoken, her body swayed. Her knees buckled and she collapsed onto the floor. Plates shattered as Cedric leapt forward, catching her before her head struck the tiles. The children screamed. Lyra grabbed her mother's limp hand, sobbing uncontrollably, while Jonas hid his face against the table leg, trembling. Cedric's hands shook as he cradled Marielle against him. Her skin was clammy, her breathing shallow. "No more waiting," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm not losing you." The next moments blurred into chaos. Cedric called for help, neighbors rushed in, and soon the shriek of ambulance sirens pierced the quiet night of their once peaceful street. The children clung to their grandmother's arms as Cedric climbed into the back of the ambulance, refusing to let go of Marielle's hand. Inside, fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her pale face. Cedric's chest ached with helplessness as he watched the medics work frantically, placing monitors on her chest, inserting 4 lines. His heart thundered, a single thought looping in his mind: if only I had forced her to go sooner. Marielle stirred faintly, her eyes fluttering open for a moment. Her lips parted and a single tear slipped down her cheek. "Cedric," she whispered weakly, her hand twitching in his grip. "I'm here," he choked out. "I'm not leaving you." Her eyes slipped shut again, her body jerking as another wave of pain shot through her belly. The monitor beeped wildly. Cedric's mind screamed as the ambulance roared down the road, carrying them toward the hospital. Every second dragged like a lifetime. He knew their lives were about to change forever, but he could never have imagined the horror waiting inside her body. The ambulance screeched to a halt, its sirens dying into a low wail as the back doors flew open. Bright hospital floodlights spilled into the night as medics rushed Marielle inside. Cedric clung to her hand until they pushed him back, shouting for space. His heart hammered against his ribs, every step echoing with dread. Inside the emergency ward, chaos was everywhere. White coats and blue scrubs blurred as nurses swarmed, voices overlapping, BP falling, pulse unstable, oxygen mask now. Cedric stood frozen at the edge of the room, his fists trembling. A nurse intercepted him, her tone sharp. "Sir, you need to wait outside." "I can't." Cedric's voice cracked. "That's my wife." Before the nurse could argue, a calm but firm voice cut through the noise. Dr. Ilara Vanes, head of internal medicine, strode in with authority. Her sharp eyes scanned the scene before settling briefly on Cedric. "He stays. If she's slipping this fast, we may need every detail he can give us." Cedric swallowed hard, nodding. He had no idea that within minutes he would wish he knew far less. The medical team worked quickly. Monitors beeped, lines were inserted, and blood samples whisked away to the lab. But as the initial frenzy settled, confusion began to spread among the doctors. Marielle's abdomen was swollen, tense, and visibly shifting under her gown. A young nurse leaned toward Dr. Vanes, whispering nervously, "Could she be pregnant?" Cedric's head snapped toward her. "Pregnant? That's impossible." He stopped himself, shame flickering across his face. "She's not pregnant." Dr. Vanes frowned, placing her gloved hand gently on Marielle's abdomen. The skin beneath her palm rippled faintly, like something alive pressing back. Even her seasoned professionalism faltered. "This is not pregnancy," she murmured. "This is something else entirely." The ultrasound machine was wheeled in. Cold gel was spread across Marielle's belly, and the probe pressed down. The room fell into tense silence, all eyes fixed on the monitor. At first static, then the grainy outline of organs. Then, something moved. It shifted abruptly across the screen, curling, twisting. The shape was irregular, serpentine, and too large for comfort. Gasps broke the silence. One nurse covered her mouth. Another muttered a prayer under her breath. Cedric gripped the bed rail so hard his knuckles whitened. What is that?" Dr. Vanes's lips tightened. "There's foreign movement. Large. Possibly parasitic, but..." She cut herself off, unwilling to finish the sentence. The room thickened with fear. Marielle moaned, her body convulsing. The monitor spiked. "Prep or immediately," Dr. Vanes barked. "We can't wait for lab confirmation. If we don't operate now, she won't make it through the night." Cedric's throat closed. Surgery. The very word felt like a knife pressed against his chest. But one look at Marielle, her face pale, her body trembling, and he knew there was no choice. He stumbled forward, catching Dr. Vanes's arm. Please, save her. Whatever's inside, get it out. Her gaze softened for the briefest second. We'll do everything we can. They rushed Marielle toward the operating theater. Cedric followed until a nurse blocked him at the double doors. You can't go any further, sir. The doors slammed shut, leaving Cedric alone in the fluorescent-lit hallway. His knees buckled and he sank onto the bench, his head buried in his hands. He could still hear her faint cries echoing in his mind. Inside the operating room, the atmosphere was grim. Bright surgical lights illuminated Marielle's body as she was draped and prepped. The anesthesiologist murmured reassurance as the mask descended over her face, her breathing slowing. Dr. Ilara Vanes and Dr. Cashin Holt, the lead surgeon on call, exchanged a glance across the sterile field. Neither said it aloud, but both understood. This was no ordinary case. Scalpels were readied, clamps positioned. The tension was suffocating. As Dr. Holt made the first incision, the air thickened with anticipation. The sound of metal against flesh, the slow spread of blood, the suction hissing. It was all routine. And yet, nothing about this case felt routine. Within minutes, as they navigated deeper, the unexpected happened. The abdominal cavity shifted violently beneath their instruments, as though resisting their intrusion. Careful, Dr. Holt warned, his voice taut. Something's pressing back. The suction tube slurped loudly, clearing fluid that pooled unnaturally dark. The anesthesiologist glanced at the vitals. Her heart rate spiking again. Then, suddenly, there was movement, visible, undeniable movement from within the cavity. Something slithered just out of sight, scraping faintly against the instruments. One nurse recoiled, her face pale. What is that? Dr. Vanes steadied her hands, her voice a low growl. Focus. No panic. But even her eyes betrayed a flicker of horror. As clamps pulled tissue aside, the surgeons leaned in closer. What they saw made their stomachs twist. It was no tumor, no cyst, no growth they had ever encountered in medical textbooks. It was something alive. Scalpel, Dr. Holt demanded, his voice clipped. The tension in the room grew unbearable. Every person present could sense it. The line between medicine and nightmare had been crossed. And in the hallway outside, Cedric waited with his head in his hands, completely unaware that the doctors inside were staring into something that defied science itself. The surgery had only just begun, but already the hospital was holding its breath. The operating room was suffocating in its silence. Every breath felt amplified, every metallic clink of instruments sharpened against the hum of the overhead lights. Dr. Cashin Holt leaned over the incision, his gloved hand steady, though his eyes betrayed the tension simmering beneath his calm exterior. The suction tube whirred, drawing out a thick, dark fluid unlike anything the team had expected. It had a pungent odor, foul and sour, strong enough that one nurse gagged behind her mask. This isn't right, Dr. Holt muttered. Dr. Ilara Vanes stood beside him, guiding the retractors. Her voice was low but resolute. Keep going. We need to know what's inside her. As they pulled tissue apart, the cavity shuddered again, unnatural, violent. Then, in a moment that froze every soul in the room, something inside pushed back against the incision wall. The skin beneath their gloves bulged outward as though a fist pressed from within. The nurse holding the retractor screamed. It's moving. Hold steady. Dr. Vanes barked, though her own pulse thundered in her ears. The bulge receded, and for a second there was only the sound of the monitors. Then it came, a wet, scraping noise like claws dragging across metal. Every person in the room stiffened. Dr. Holt swallowed hard, his hand tightening on the scalpel. I'm going in deeper. With careful precision, he widened the incision. Blood welled, the suction tube working frantically. And then, it appeared. At first it was just a glimpse, a slick, pale surface glistening under the surgical lights. Then it twitched, curling like a whip. A long, sinewy form slid into view, segmented and grotesque. Gasps filled the room. One nurse stumbled back, nearly knocking over a tray of instruments. What in God's name? Whispered another. Dr. Vanes leaned closer, her face pale but determined. It's a parasite. A massive one. The creature writhed sluggishly, its body coiled through Marielle's abdominal cavity. Veins pulsed along its surface, glistening with mucus. It shifted again, producing a sickening squelch that echoed through the sterile room. Clamp it, Dr. Holt ordered. Two nurses scrambled, their hands shaking as they passed instruments. Holt's forceps clamped onto part of the writhing mass, but the parasite thrashed violently, nearly jerking free. The monitors spiked. Marielle's vitals crashed into chaos. She's going into shock, the anesthesiologist cried, adjusting fluids rapidly. Stabilize her. Veins snapped. We can't lose her now. The surgeons wrestled with the impossible. Inch by inch they pulled the parasite free. It resisted, suctioning itself to her organs as though it belonged there. The sound was unbearable, wet tearing, squelching, the hiss of suction. Finally, with one last wrench, the creature erupted from her body, sliding out in a grotesque mass. It hit the surgical tray with a heavy thud. The operating room froze. There it lay, a monstrous parasite, coiled and twitching, nearly 3 feet long. Its pale, translucent body revealed pulsing veins within, its head equipped with rows of hooked, fang-like structures that opened and closed soundlessly, searching. The nurses gagged. One ran for the disposal bin, her stomach heaving. Dr. Holt stood frozen, chest heaving under his gown. I've never seen anything like this. Dr. Vaines's eyes narrowed. Get it sealed immediately. Biohazard protocol. Double containment. As the nurses scrambled to secure the parasite in a reinforced specimen jar, Cedric paced the waiting area outside, unaware of the horror unfolding. His hands shook violently as he gripped his rosary beads, whispering prayers under his breath. Lyra and Jonas huddled against their grandmother, their small faces pale and frightened. Back inside the OR, the parasite continued to thrash faintly in its container, its head striking against the glass with sickening taps. The nurses recoiled each time it moved. Marielle's body, however, told a different story. Her vitals steadied slightly, her breathing easing as though the weight inside her had finally been lifted. Dr. Holt exhaled, his mask damp with sweat. It's out. God help us, it's finally out. But relief did not come easily. The image of the parasite lingered in every mind, an abomination that defied reason. Dr. Vaines removed her gloves, her voice tight but composed. Send it to pathology. And under no circumstances does this leave the containment ward. As the jar was carried out, the parasite writhed once more, its body smacking against the reinforced glass. Every step echoed with dread. For the first time in her long career, Dr. Alara Vaines felt a chill she could not shake. Medicine had rules, explanations, boundaries. But what they had pulled from Marielle Davrin's belly shattered all of them. And in the waiting room, Cedric clutched his children tighter, unaware that his wife's nightmare was only half over. The surgical lights dimmed, and the tension in the operating theater slowly unraveled into a fragile silence. The parasite was sealed, contained in a reinforced jar, its pale body still twitching as it was wheeled to the pathology lab. For the first time in hours, the monitors by Marielle's bedside showed steadiness. Her pulse had evened out, her breathing no longer ragged. Vitals are holding, the anesthesiologist confirmed with a sigh of relief. Dr. Holt removed his gloves with shaking hands. His shoulders slumped as though the weight of the world had pressed him down. We pulled her back from the edge, he muttered, almost to himself. Dr. Alara Vaines wasn't as quick to relax. Her sharp eyes lingered on Marielle's body, the pale skin stretched tight over her now partially deflated abdomen. Something gnawed at her instincts. She should be stabilizing, she said carefully. But we need to keep her under observation. Don't assume the worst is over. Hours later, Marielle was wheeled into recovery, her body wrapped in hospital blankets, her face pale but peaceful in the glow of the dimmed ward. Cedric was finally allowed to see her. He rushed to her bedside, collapsing into the chair and clutching her hand as tears streaked down his face. You're safe now, he whispered. They got it out. You're safe. Lyra and Jonas pressed against their grandmother, too frightened to step forward but unable to look away. The image of their mother lying motionless under tubes and wires burned into their young minds. For a while everything was calm. Nurses moved quietly, checking drips and adjusting monitors. Cedric leaned close, speaking softly to Marielle about the children, the home, the sunflowers in the garden waiting for her. But then, without warning, Marielle stirred. Her body jerked faintly, her eyelids fluttering open. Cedric's heart leapt as he leaned in. Marielle? Can you hear me? She blinked slowly, confusion clouding her gaze. Then, her hand moved instinctively to her belly. Her expression changed, sharpened with panic. She sat up abruptly, clutching her stomach as a low groan escaped her lips. The monitors shrieked. Nurses rushed in, shouting orders. BP dropping again. Severe abdominal distress. Marielle's face contorted, her body trembling as though another wave of pain gripped her from within. And then, it happened. Her body convulsed violently, and with a sickening, wet sound, something massive slid from her beneath the hospital sheets. A nurse screamed. Another stumbled back, crashing into the equipment. Cedric froze in horror as he watched his wife's body expel another entity, larger, darker, its form twisting as it hit the floor with a heavy thud. The smell was unbearable, metallic and foul, filling the entire room. For one surreal second, everyone stood frozen, staring at the grotesque form writhing on the tile. It was not the same as the parasite extracted in surgery. This one was heavier, its surface ridged, its hooked mouth opening and snapping in the stale hospital air. It twisted violently, its slick body slapping against the floor. Dr. Vanes burst into the room, her face hardening as she took in the sight. "Contain it? Now," she shouted. But the nurses hesitated, fear rooting them in place. The thing lashed forward, its body smearing the tiles, its fanged mouth clamping onto a fallen sheet. Cedric grabbed Marielle, pulling her close, shielding her trembling body with his own. His voice broke with rage and terror. "You said it was over. You said she was safe." Dr. Vanes grabbed the reinforced specimen container herself, her hands steady despite the chaos. With a swift motion, she and Dr. Holt trapped the thrashing creature inside, sealing it with a metallic snap. The jar rattled violently as the parasite slammed against the glass, its fangs scraping with a screech that made every hair in the room stand on end. For a long moment, only the sound of labored breathing filled the recovery ward. Nurses leaned against walls, their faces pale and clammy. Cedric clutched Marielle tighter, his eyes wide, his chest heaving as though he'd just stared into the face of hell. Dr. Vanes held the container in her arms, her jaw clenched. "Two," she whispered grimly. There were two of them. Marielle, weak and trembling, opened her eyes just long enough to whisper, "Please, no more." Her voice cracked, her body sinking back against Cedric's chest. Cedric kissed her damp forehead, his tears falling freely. "It's over, love. It has to be over now." But the doctors exchanged glances that told another story. The parasites were sealed, yes, but no one in that room truly believed the nightmare had ended. The storm inside the hospital finally began to quiet. The second parasite, sealed and contained, was escorted under heavy precaution to the pathology wing. The floors were scrubbed, the monitors reset, but the air in the recovery ward still carried the weight of something unholy. Marielle lay weak but alive, her face pale, her body trembling as the sedatives wore off. Cedric never left her side. His hand remained locked around hers, his thumb brushing gently over her knuckles as though the simple act could anchor her to this world. The children were eventually allowed in, escorted carefully by their grandmother. Lyra crept forward first, her eyes wide and glassy. She reached out, hesitant, before finally placing her small hand over her mother's. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please don't leave us again." Marielle's lips trembled. She pulled her daughter close, gathering enough strength to whisper back, "I'm here, my love. I'll never leave you." Jonas clambered onto the edge of the bed, burying his face against her arm. His little body shook with quiet sobs. Cedric pressed his hand over both children's backs, his eyes glistening with tears. For the first time in days, the family held on to each other without fear of interruption. Later that evening, when the ward grew quiet and the fluorescent lights softened, Dr. Ilara Vanes stepped in. Her eyes softened at the sight of the family huddled together, but her voice remained steady. "She is stable for now," she explained gently, "but she will need weeks of monitoring. We do not yet understand how this happened or if there could be more." Cedric's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Do whatever it takes. She's all I have." Marielle turned her head weakly toward the doctor, her voice no more than a whisper. "You saved me. Twice." Dr. Vanes's expression flickered, part pride, part unease. "We saved you together. But now you must promise me something. No more ignoring your body. No more denying medical care when you need it." Marielle's eyes glistened. For the first time, her stubborn walls cracked. "I thought I was strong enough to handle everything on my own. I was wrong. Nature has its place, but so does medicine." Cedric kissed her forehead, his tears falling freely. The children clung to her arms, nodding in agreement as if sealing the promise with their silent pleas. Days later, Marielle was discharged. The walk to their home porch felt like a pilgrimage. Cedric guided her carefully, his arm around her waist, the children skipping close by as though afraid to let her out of sight. When they reached their house, Marielle paused at the steps, her eyes drawn to the sunflowers swaying gently in the breeze. Their golden faces turned toward the fading light of the setting sun, unbroken despite the storms that had battered them. She lowered herself onto the porch chair, her breath catching at the simple comfort of being home again. Cedric sat beside her, sliding his hand into hers. The children sprawled at her feet, their laughter cautious but slowly returning. The garden was quiet, but within the silence lay peace. Marielle looked out at the sunflowers, her voice soft, reflective. I used to think strength meant never asking for help. But I see now, it means knowing when to fight and when to let others fight for you. Cedric pressed his forehead against hers. And we'll fight together. Always. The family sat in that moment, wrapped in the glow of the setting sun, grateful for what had been spared and humbled by what they had endured. The nightmare in the hospital had revealed something far deeper than horror. It had taught them the fragility of life, the danger of denial, and the priceless gift of listening when the body speaks. Marielle lifted her gaze to the sky, a tear rolling down her cheek. I survived. And I will never take that for granted again. As the sun dipped low and the sunflowers bowed gently in the twilight, the Davern family held each other close, changed forever but together, alive and stronger than they had ever been.